A while back, I read an article by Jessica Valenti. You might not think you're sexist until you take a look at your bookshelf. This one stuck out to me when I read it, and I always wanted to do a video response, so here it is. Your taste in music, books, television, or art sends a message about what you think is worth your time and who you think is smart. That could also be said about who you follow on Twitter. There are certain people who set off red flags for me, and I've always noticed it's the same people retweeting each other and recommending the same websites and material. Director and screenwriter John Waters once said, if you go home with somebody and they don't have books, don't fuck 'em. Wise words, but I'd add, especially if they don't have books by women. I think you're sidestepping his point, but let's see where you go with this. When you live in a world with outrageous, explicit misogyny, domestic violence, sexual assault, and attack on reproductive rights, to name a few, it's easy to breeze by the small stuff. After all, there are issues more pressing than whether or not the culture someone consumes is too homogeneous. But passive bias is still bias, and it has ripple effects into the broader culture. Is it really so much to ask that we pay attention to what shapes our tastes? Well, let's talk about passive bias. As I said, who you follow on Twitter and who you retweet shows bias. I notice the people on the extreme end of social justice all follow each other and recommend each other's work. In some cases, these people flat out lie, but it gets overlooked for what is perceived as the greater good. For example, I was riding the subway recently when I noticed my seatmate scrolling through a Twitter feed that looked remarkably like mine. I was tickled to be sitting next to a like-minded person, but as I looked on, I noticed there was one thing that seemed to be missing from his news feed: women. He was following fantastic and smart men, but still, as far as I could tell, all men. I got the same uneasy feeling when I listened to a podcast interview with a TV showrunner and writer that I admire. He spoke eloquently about his passions and mentors and the people whose work he liked most: all men. So you want these men to expand who they learn from and whose media they consume. So let's just take you as an example. Let's say someone tells me I should be reading these wonderful feminist articles by Jessica Valenti. Eventually, I stumble upon this. I took a special picture for all the misogynist whiners in my feed today. Hashtag best vacation ever. The shirt reads, I bathe in male tears. That doesn't come off as very inviting to men, considering you are a feminist who wants men to read more work by women. Then I start finding other feminists on Twitter who drink from coffee cups that read, male tears. And then I see hashtags like, kill all men, or kill all white men. When I see what goes on in certain feminist circles, I don't feel like I'm missing out. I'm sure both of these people are smart, engaged, and not deliberately or actively sexist, but when your worldview is solely shaped by men, you are missing out. And like it or not, your taste in music, books, television, or art says something about you. It sends a message about what you think is worth your time, what you think is interesting, and who you think is smart. So if the only culture you pay attention to is created by men, or created by white people, you are making an explicit statement about who and what is important. Part of the problem is that while art or books that white men put out is portrayed as universally appealing, culture produced by women or people of color is seen as specific to their gender or racial identity. Well, it's like I said, within the world of certain feminist circles, it doesn't look like I'm missing out. As far as what is or isn't universally appealing, this right here says all I need to know about you. This is not universally appealing, this is appealing to hardcore feminists. It looks like you cater to a specific audience. When author Shannon Hale visited an elementary school to talk about her work, for example, she realized that the audience was all girls. The school administration only allowed the female students out of class for her event. As Hale wrote at the time, I do not talk about girl stuff. I talk about books and writing, reading rejections and moving through them, how to come up with story ideas. But because I'm a woman, because some of my books have pictures of girls on the cover, because some of my books have princess in the title, I'm stamped as for girls only. However, the male writers who have boys on their cover speak to the entire school. If this is true, then it's worth discussing. I'd like to know the specifics of why that happens, as sometimes decisions like that are made for reasons I'm not aware of. I'd like to get both sides of the story. But when feminists pushing for diversity bathe in male tears, drink male tears, and want to hashtag kill all men, what am I supposed to think? Radical feminists do a lot to push their target audience of straight white men away because they refuse to behave themselves. This kind of passive sexism has wide-reaching impact. The annual VIDA count, which tallies the racial and gender diversities in magazines and newspaper bylines and book reviews, for example, shows we still have a long way to go for equality and cultural representation. Then you need to tell the people pushing for diversity to do a better job at behaving themselves, and while you're at it, call them out when they lie and manipulate. Part of that challenge is not just about what kind of culture we consume, but what we put into that world as well. Last year, technologist Anil Dash, for example, wrote about a New Year's resolution to only retweet women. He came to the idea after realizing that even though he followed men and women equally, he retweeted men 3 times as often as women. This, despite my knowing how underrepresented women's voices are in the areas I obsess over, such as technology and policy and culture. I could do better. We all could. One time I read someone say, "Who you follow on Twitter reflects what you believe," or something to that extent. What they meant is if you don't follow a variety of people, you are probably biased. So I started paying more attention to the social justice and feminist types, the ones who keep complaining about sexism, racism, diversity, and such things. I started seeing a lot of inflammatory rhetoric. I saw a lot of people who I'd never associate with, and this even included straight white men. I started seeing why people dislike social justice warriors and radical feminists so much. Yes, our tastes are our tastes. I'm not suggesting you put away all books written by men or only listen to female musicians. Well, not yet anyway. But our cultural bias, as unintentional as they may be, are worth thinking about. Not just to address broad inequalities, but to open up our own minds. I've seen enough of the culture radical feminists and social justice warriors are cultivating and where their bias lies. These people all follow each other on Twitter, retweet what they say, and generally don't associate with the dissenting voices.